Well, I'm here with Paul Culmsee. We're at the New Zealand SharePoint conference in Auckland. And so I wanted to talk about a couple things. One, I do want you to do a quick plug for your book. I know we're talking about something else, but do a plug for your book.
The book is called The Heretics Guide to Best Practices. If you're a SharePoint audience looking at this, you'll be refreshed and you'll be pleasantly surprised that there's utterly no SharePoint content within it whatsoever. It's actually a business book, but if it's all about dealing with complex problem solving, I think, and the conditions required to get true collaborative work done.
And I think it is important to point out at the end of the acknowledgements, I am mentioned as one of the reviewers. So
that's true.
That's right.
You were a machine.
I was looking for like a color highlight on that page specifically of my name, but you know, next time, next book.
Yeah.
So
next book, whenever that will happen.
Right.
2015,
so, yes.
Something like that.
Well, so the other topic that we're talking about, I mean, and we'll kind of jump around this. And I know that you have a knowledge management tool. And so I want you to talk a little bit about that. And part of what sparked this, we were talking about a couple different ideas that are really interesting, and maybe we'll get into it in the time that we have here. But around, as we've talked about, you know, SharePoint and about visual models and mapping tools in general, about this idea of creating these massive models that are connecting and relating in a social way the various artifacts that are produced in a system. Yep. Why don't you talk about the tool that you've built and have out there?
Yep. So it would help with a whiteboard so I'm going to do my best without drawing. I reserve the right to air draw, right, because I can't kind of help myself without sitting on my hands. So basically, in the knowledge world, there's really two kind of competing approaches that people do. It's either the codification approach, where you write everything down, and that's, I guess, the traditional SharePoint approach of wikis, blogs, whatever the theory is. You take all the tacit know-how and knowledge inside someone's head, and you articulate that explicitly in some sort of artifact, be it a document, a wiki, or whatever other form takes your fancy. The other approach to knowledge management that's become, I guess, particularly prevalent with SharePoint 2010 as a result of social media is the idea of connecting people to the right expertise through things like people search and profiles and all of the sort of customizations you can do in 2010, and with third-party extensions as well. Where we got kind of interested was, we like that idea, and it's highly important, you should do it. But what happens if the person leaves? And in the outside social world of LinkedIn and Facebook, that's fine, because they're still connected via your social network, whichever company they work for. That doesn't really change much. But you know, there are situations where you might leave, a Microsoft guy might go to Google, and you know, people might get sued in the case of the sort of information that can be disclosed. So combine that with the sort of aging demographic, the baby boomer generation. Certain companies, I think in the energy sector and utilities in particular, have a disproportionately aging population. I have a client where half of the workforce is over the age of 50. Right. So that's a lot of valuable information locked up in people's heads, and a lot of it's that sort of expert knowledge that people can't necessarily just write it down. Right. It doesn't work that way. Yep. Knowledge is highly contextual. You know,
in my session today, so I did my session on metadata, social tools, and productivity. And I talk about as socials being another layer to the search experience, and talk about how social adds context to conversation, to artifacts, and builds upon that. To your point, is that social can add a lot of value, but there's a limit to that. You can have in your social network a lot of value, a lot of shared knowledge, but if there's a key part, and especially in this situation where someone very senior leaves the organization that is a thought leader in the company, their removal, the social network doesn't just fill in that gap.
Yes, that's it.
You know, so that's lost. So there needs to be a combination of things to be able to capture that more than just social.
Well, so the approach we took, the other bit of background is in the non-SharePoint, non-IT world, where my company practices, we get paid to build maps, visual maps of rationale. So we'll be involved in a complex problem or a complex situation with a variety of stakeholders, and we will literally map the rationale live as things are discussed, and we'll capture it in questions, potential answers or ideas, pros and cons that support or argue against the ideas. So by the end of a session, you have a very rich understanding of the dimensions of a problem. So we've been doing that for a number of years. What happened, it's called dialogue mapping, by the way. And I was dialogue mapping some road engineers. And there was a guy there who had about 40 years experience, and he was talking about the freeway network where I live, circa 1970. No one else in the room was there at the time, so he was the only guy, and he had incredible context, and he was telling you things that only someone who was there could tell you. Now this guy was already in semi-retirement mode, and as a result of being in semi-retirement mode, he was asked to write his memoirs. And so this guy was having to somehow codify 40 years of tacit experience and literally write this stuff down. So I realise that's not a particularly efficient thing to do, particularly when tacit knowledge is not something that you can just suddenly assemble your thoughts. It tends to be given a situation, you might look at a situation, and the person with a whole lot of experience might see that one variable, the one pattern that everybody else doesn't see. You can't really write that down. That is completely contextual. And that was what was apparent when he's telling me about the 1970s freeway situation. So we thought, well, rather than get this guy to write it down, maybe we should just film him talking about his reflections on a topic, or put another expert with him, give him a beer, whatever. Just talk about a context or a situation. Now that's been done before, but the problem is that creates very long, very potentially boring videos, because...
Yeah, think about the guy that was written up, I think it was in Wired magazine, or maybe it was Fast Company, the guy that's part of, I don't know if you know the guy's name, older gentleman that's based in the San Francisco Bay Area, that works for Microsoft R&D, that was literally had cameras strapped to himself and was recording everything that he did, and was trying to also, as part of that, capture, like pull things out of his memory, like to talk about and tell stories about the things that he knew, and was filling up, building massive models, because also tagging and and correlating all that content, and just massive. But then to be able to search through that and find any use out of that content again, it's to some degree it's like putting everything in a binder and putting it on a shelf that's in a very large warehouse that is across town.
So there's two approaches people have taken. The number one is to do sort of linguistic analysis, and so you can analyze what's said, you can pull out metadata, but it's really just keywords. It's not concept, it's not arguments as such. The other way that was popular in, I guess, a guy by the name of David Snowden talked about this sort of technique in the early 2000s, where they recognised this problem, that there's no point getting a guy with that amount of, 10 hours of him writing compared to 10 hours of him talking about his experiences. The burden is a lot less, and the richness is a lot more, right?
Yeah, because we're talking circular patterns, there's stories, there's other context around that. It allows people to interact, just like I did just here.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so basically what we thought was, so the other approach, what they did was they would take these hours of footage and they would give it to journalists or documentary type companies, and they would edit them down and create these so-called mini documentaries. 10 minutes of concentrated goodness, basically.
According to that.
Yeah, but the problem was no one really, well that's kind of like making you write it down again. So much gets lost in that, and insight, you can't predict insight. What you might, you might read something or you might watch a video, you'll get a completely different aha moment than what I might. So rather than do that, we thought, well, this mapping technique is a very good way of capturing the whole structure and rationale of a conversation. If we use that as a navigation method for a video of someone talking, I can take pretty much anything a person says and put it into this question, idea, pro, con. But if we tagged each node or each idea or each argument against when it was said in the video, suddenly you have a navigation method for all this content. So over here you might have the video, over here you might have the map, and it's literally a way to navigate. And so we tested it with a video of a guy who he was talking about his military service and what his company could learn, what lessons he could learn from it. But he spends the first 3 minutes just telling everyone how much everyone should be so grateful that they work for such a wonderful, benevolent company. And he wasn't actually answering the question he was supposed to answer. It was just preamble. So in this situation, rather than sit through that, you can sort of look at the map and go, oh, what did he say about actionable insights? Click, and you go straight to that position. So rather than edit it into some 10-minute documentary that someone else thinks is compelling, leave it unedited, have it raw, this sort of thing, map it, tag it. While you're there, if they talk about a certain project or a certain geographic location or a certain supplier or a certain client, you can tag that as well. So that's fine. That all goes into a database we've developed that stores rationale. And so very much like the way the content query web part or a data view web part works, we have a web part that you can then drop on a SharePoint page and issue a query. A bit like for the SharePoint geeks like Camel or like a SQL query. And basically say, go through the rationale. I want to see ideas that Christian has answered in relation to any project in this geographic area. Back it comes as an XML feed, which you can style in the same way a data view web part. And suddenly you've now got this corpus of knowledge is accessible via search, via contextual navigation, via your My Site profile, and all those sort of scenarios.
Have you talked to anybody, like any of the social vendors, about then extending that and being able, because I just think of that as you now are accessing ideas within video that you've gone through. Yes, there's a longer process to go in and map that out, and you have to have some expertise in being able to go through and to map that out and take the time to go and do that. But we were talking about this tacit knowledge and important content that needs to be much more accessible. I mean, I can see a lot of organizations that are going through and doing this process to make that accessible. But then you want to be able to extend that. Now you want to go back to that social paradigm. And you want to have people to be able to go in and, based on the search results, they find this, that they can put things in, make other connections, other correlations to other content, make comments, all those kinds of things, which could impact the weight of that that segment, that place in a video in search results. And I think all of that would be very interesting, beyond just the academic aspects of it.
Totally.
But from a practical standpoint, be able to go and have a much richer search experience. It'd be interesting to see one or more of the social vendors, taking a look at that and building on top of that.
So I can see very much how that sort of thing can work. I mean, the fact that we architected it in such a way that it's another web part. So you can surface it with any of those vendors. I mean, if you take the example of what NewsGator do with My Sites and the extensions they build.
Okay, but we have some placement.
Just unanticipated product placement to my right.
The check will be in the mail. So.
Absolutely. But yeah, all of those sort of vendors, I think this adds a dimension that hasn't really been well explored in the knowledge management area anyway. And I think that really what it's been is there's been no decent way to navigate or create metadata based on concepts. That sort of almost a Socratic kind of...
Right, well there's no machine way to automate that process.
So
you can't escape the need for, one, a human to go through and take the time to do that, two, that they have the expertise to be able to go through and do the mapping and apply that. I mean, you do need to have, the other side of that, and we're now going to get too deep into it, but based on the skill set of the person who's doing that mapping, what they may uncover and relate to versus somebody who's has deeper expertise.
That's a good point, and there's two parts to that. So A, you have to ask good questions. Any sort of process, be it a business analysis process on understanding goals versus doing a lesson learned. There is a lot of value in asking the right questions, and a lot of the right questions actually come from people who have similar expertise. So an interesting scenario would be something like this. You put two discipline experts, ask them to talk through their experiences of a certain project or a certain scenario. But the person doing the mapping doesn't necessarily need the same level of expertise.
They don't have to have the expertise, but...
That's just understanding the ontology of the question, idea, pro-con type rule. Yes, it does take some... For example, a lot of people talk in stories. So you'll get, I've mapped people who, some people will just make their point straight away. And as a mapper, I capture the point. Is that what you said? Yes. A lot of other people they're storytellers.
Unable to give a straight answer. Let me tell you this story about, no.
Exactly, yeah. But so in fact, sometimes when I'm mapping live, I'm actually trying to second guess the point they're actually making. Where are you going with this? I think you're going here. And then they finally get to their point, and sometimes, that's not what you meant at all, and I have to back up. It's just the way people are. Now, if you take a machine learning type approach to that, there's so much bad data that's going to be collected through that. I mean, it does take a human to actually understand. It's the moral behind the story is the point they're making. I guess, yeah, it's just different people talking different ways. So yeah, that does kind of need that human aspect, but consider it this way. One of the MVPs here, I won't mention him just in case I get in trouble, but he has a client where the managing director of the company has got a guy that's sort of a $500 to $700 an hour consultant because he has 60 odd years experience in this one discipline. And the managing director said, if you can make that guy 1% more efficient, that's going to make a $10 million difference to the bottom line of this organisation. You take a graduate and they can map that. So it's part of the mentoring approach, part of an integrated strategy of I guess, master-apprentice type learning. You actually get a mentor to do the interpretation and map. So they're not necessarily the ones asking the questions. That could be a video that's 10 years old. It doesn't really matter as long as it's rich conversation. Right. But the graduate can learn a lot just from synthesizing that map, and once it's done, it's then available for everybody else. Yeah. So I think if you consider what's the alternative, get the guy to write down his memoirs. Right. I think it's a.
Well, this is the other facet. I know that we'll wrap things up, but once you I say whether this is true or not, but I get the sense that you go in and you do the mapping there through the social experience, other people coming in, reviewing the content, looking at those statements. Through that social, they may refine that process. They may improve that.
It can be used in a wiki scenario, precisely.
Yeah, exactly. Like that. So they may see insights into that content that were not mapped out, that were not the detail that wasn't there, which is another strength of the social experience. Totally. But at some point, you have to start. You have to make that available. Yes. If I never find the content, then I'm never going to have the ability to comment on it.
So, and that's exactly right. So, yeah, getting to the start of that point, there's things like ratings. The ability for someone to make a change to a node because they interpret it slightly different, the version history, leverage all of the SharePoint features in that aspect, being able to make a connection to another map or another conversation or a document or a policy, that's another aspect to that. So yeah, it's I think that's part of the value proposition is the fact that you can integrate the best of everything else. So consider a search result page where okay, you've got your documents over here, you've got your people search results here, and you've got your knowledge search results here from the various discipline expert interview, lessons learned, whatever format that may take. That's there with the other forms of information. Yeah.
So Paul, where can people get more information about this?
Well, this is actually the first time I've talked about it in any detail. So we're going to have a private beta probably in about 6 to 8 weeks. I have screencasts of the functionality. I haven't put it on YouTube yet. We'll do a couple of other things before we do that. Okay. So the best way is just to basically ping me via Twitter or via the 7 Sigma site or the Clever Workarounds blog. And if it's of interest, let us know, and you can get onto the private beta program and check it out.
Excellent. And yeah, so you want to do one last year. Your Twitter is just Paul Culmsee?
Yes, so at Paul Culmsee. The blog is www.cleverworkarounds.com, so that's all one word. Company website 7sigma.com.au. I think via any of those channels will suffice.
You'll be able to find it.
Yep.
All right, thanks a lot for your time. And
no problem.